Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
But I know you're here this week to hear Christy Rounds talk about Peru. She's been traveling to Peru for more than 25 years and did the Inca Trail on her honeymoon, and they've taken another half dozen trips, and they've actually lived in Peru for 6 months. So she's going to be talking all about independent travel, indigenous people, plant-based medicine, the role of nature in the lives of people in the Andes, and some of the cool trips that are maybe less known than the ones that get a lot of attention. And she's also going to be talking a little bit about her documentary film on this topic that's going to come out in September. So welcome, Christy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here. I was part of the Minnesota Rovers for years, and so it's really special to be kind of finding my way back to this organization. I actually joined the Rovers just recently, so hopefully I'll see some familiar faces on some upcoming trips. All right. So the title of my presentation is Escape Bound. And honestly, I had actually forgotten, because I signed up to do this a while ago. I forgot that the whole presentation was going to be about Peru. So I'll kind of move through this quickly, but the first part of my presentation, I know when I originally contacted the group, I wasn't sure whether to talk about my book, which was Escape Bound, which was about an 18,000-mile road trip that I took after a divorce, or whether to talk about Peru. And I think what I'd ended up saying is that I was going to kind of do a combination of both. And I think that's what was stuck in my head. But then maybe when I communicated via email, it was just the Peru portion. So anyway, I'm going to cover both. And that's sort of what my slide deck here is set up for. So first of all, I was actually part of the Minnesota Rovers back in the 1980s. Let's see, I'm having trouble finding my thing there, my cursor. It's gone. Okay. Anyway, in the 1980s, and I participated for my very first trip with the Rovers was a winter camping trip, which I just about got hypothermia thanks to some very astute folks with the Rovers. They identified the fact that I had boots that were from Target. They helped to get me outfitted a little bit better, and probably, like I said, prevented hypothermia. But after that, I actually kind of settled into the outdoor activities and joined trail clearing. It was in the Rovers that I learned to cross-country ski, first classic, then skate. I did some whitewater kayaking trips, or whitewater canoeing. Actually, it wasn't kayaking, whitewater canoeing trips. We did climbing trips to Vertical Endeavors and Taylor's Falls. I even got a chance to spend some time in the Wind River Range with the Rovers, and did a couple of the annual trips to Devil's Tower climbing, because I also learned to climb with the group. So my story is that for the past 2 decades, I've been involved in the outdoor industry in one capacity or another. So after my time with the Rovers, I ended up marrying a guy who was he had been a professional ski racer. He had gone to school at Vail Mountain School, and he was a big outdoor industry guy. But we together ended up, well, before I met him, I was the product manager for Pure drinking water systems, and my husband was one of our sales reps. So that's how we met, at Outdoor Retailer in Salt Lake City. And together we became manufacturers reps in the Midwest. So we lived in Michigan. Our territory was Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. And my husband then later became a vice president for Camelback, Cloudveil. That kind of brought us into the manufacturing world. And through that, we ended up becoming the master distributors for Drift helmet cameras. So Drift was a competitor to GoPro in the early days of helmet cameras. And we ended up having, so our distribution was from Argentina to Alaska. So every single helmet camera sold in the Western Hemisphere went through our little, basically through our bedroom. It was terrifying, honestly. That was a very exciting, very very dramatic time. And then we became manufacturers of stand-up paddleboards. Again, that was something where my husband had identified a need in the market, and that Laird Hamilton had these hard boards, but there weren't a lot of people that were doing inflatable stand-up paddleboards. And at the time, we were living in Colorado, so on the rivers in Colorado, the inflatable boards made more sense. So we were manufacturers for the inflatable stand-up paddleboards. And then we also, in the past, well, it would have been starting in 2015, we took over an outdoor store called Adventure Bound in Ellicottville, New York. And so we had an outdoor store and a coffee shop. And this is actually, this photo here is our little troopy with the stand-up paddleboards loaded up on top in Peru. So we did a lot of stand-up paddleboarding all around Latin America. While we were married, because we had oftentimes had our own businesses, we had a lot of free time to be able to travel, or at least flexibility to travel. And oftentimes my husband would, instead of negotiating salary deals, like in a higher salary, he would negotiate flexible work arrangements. So we were able to travel a lot. And we hiked the Inca Trail a couple of times, including our honeymoon. And then we summited El Misti, which is in Peru, El Plomo in Chile, and Aconcagua, which was the highest one. Aconcagua is the highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere. So it's just under 23,000 feet. So that was kind of a big one. And supposedly when I got to the top, I said, I'm going to have babies so I don't have to do this anymore. And that's what we did. So then the next year I ended up getting pregnant with our first daughter. So we had 3 kids, and we did a lot of traveling with our kids. We ended up, we traveled to 33 countries and lived in 9 countries for over a month or more. So our kids had an opportunity to take classes in Spanish and kind of really get to know different cultures. We also spent 7 months living in Peru, and that was all, we were working towards Peruvian residency. And even with our kids, when they were kind of between 13 and 16, we ended up taking them to 15,000 feet on the Lares Trek in Peru. So we've had a lot of experience in Peru, a lot of experience in Latin America. We're super thankful for, just feel really blessed for, a lot of those wonderful experiences. Let's see. So then in January of 2020, we went through a divorce. My husband and I we'd been married for many years and ended up going through divorce. And all of those pillars that had kind of been foundational in my validation came down: financial status, social standing, happy family. And I was planning at the time, I was going to be staying in Ellicottville, or I was living in Ellicottville, which was where our outdoor store was. But the building that our store was in and the place where we lived was owned by my mother-in-law. So I didn't have an option to stay there. So then at the time I was thinking, well, the kids and I can stay with my parents for a little while until we figure out what to do. But my mom called within 3 weeks after my husband asked for a divorce. My mom called to let me know that my dad had been diagnosed with cancer. This was right at the height of the pandemic. And so there was not an option to be able to stay with them, because otherwise it would have put my dad's life at risk. So I borrowed $8,000 from my mom and dad, bought a pop-up trailer, and we hit the road. Really our destination, my daughter had been planning this. My at the time she was 15. She had been planning a trip like this for years, for at least 2 years. She'd collected 72 points of interest in the western part of the United States, because she wanted to become a travel influencer. So she wanted to get these Instagram pictures all across the United States. So she and I traveled 18,000 miles. And the other 2 kids, my youngest one, gets car sick. So he stayed with dad for most of the trip, but he did fly out to LA and came back with us across the United States. And my oldest didn't want to be on her sister's social media influencer tour. So she bought a car. I helped her buy a car, and she joined us for part of it, but she just kind of came in and out. And through the whole thing, I ended up writing a book. I wrote Escape Bound because it was one of the most poignant adventures. I mean, it was really a beautiful, the whole thing ended up becoming a really beautiful experience. And so anyway, that's in a personal memoir that I wrote. But literally for 3 months, we never knew where we were going to stay from one night to the next. We had, it was such a crazy thing. We used apps like Campendium or iOverlander to figure out where we were going to stay. But then because my daughter said, we had to keep going. So we always had to move every night. And literally we just would never know where we were going to spend the next night. But it was an exciting adventure, and one that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Let's see, I was going to switch over. Oh, only because this is actually a cool video for the book. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only person whose book has a theme song. Let's see here. So this is a song that was actually written by my daughter. It's called Escape Bound. And she wrote it when she and a friend were at this music camp when they were 14. So it was a year and a half before the divorce that they actually wrote the song that then became the title of my book. And her friend who she wrote the song was with us for part of the road trip. So she's also in this video. So I'll play this now just because it's kind of a cool intro. Does this work now?
Yep. Maybe not.
Yeah, it's starting. Mm-hmm.
Too much reality, can't find identity. I lost my sanity. Gone with my faith and trust. Look where I've ended up. I'm lost, can't find my way. Am I okay? Forget that. Sanity is overrated. Thinking straight is just too complicated. 'Cause I'm escape bound. Gotta turn my life around. Swimming in thoughts now. See the world in different hues. Life is a blank canvas for me to use. We take it in my hands. It's taking over air out of us. So much more than books can see. Gotta turn the life around. Thoughts now. I have escaped now.
So that's a little bit about kind of like our little adventure. Anyway, so that gives you a little bit of background about kind of like, I'm going to skip through some of these slides because some of the slides were just pictures from Escape Bound. I want to move into, I really do want to get into the Peru portion here. So anyway, through Escape Bound, through this whole month, that journey of 18,000 miles, at the time I was working on another business called Nomaditudes. And part of this was because I realized that I couldn't live in a stand-up or in a pop-up trailer forever. It was going to be getting cold in North America. So I was trying to cook up some idea, something where I could go to Latin America. And so I worked with a company called Selena Youth Hostels. I don't know if anybody's heard of them, but if you haven't, it's a good company to know about. They're high-end youth hostels. They cater to digital nomads. And so I reached out to them and negotiated a flat fee pricing structure where we could pay 1 monthly fee for students to be able to stay in the youth hostels. And apparently this had never been done before in the hospitality industry, where you just kind of work out a 1 monthly fee, but then you can travel to any of their different Selena destinations. And at the time I asked if they could be similar in pricing, if we could work out something that was similar in pricing to what kids would be paying in a dormitory if they're staying on campus. Because at this time, this was now 2020, fall of 2020, a lot of the kids had their colleges were canceling classes, but Costa Rica was actually experiencing really, really low COVID numbers. And so my deal was that I went to Costa Rica and then I said, hey, instead of staying in your parents' basement, taking your classes online, come to Costa Rica and travel with me. And that's what Nomaditudes was. So we had one flat fee that allowed us to travel to any Selena location. And there were 10 of them in Costa Rica. And that way too, it was a hedge against the epidemiological threat, because if there was an outbreak of COVID in one region, I could just move the kids to a different area. As it turned out, we never ended up having an issue. It was just, they just never experienced the numbers, mainly because Costa Rica is such an outdoor type culture. So we spent about 6 months, my kids and I, all three of them came with me to Costa Rica. So we spent about 6 months in Latin America then, as I worked to build Nomaditudes. And I say that in losing my home, I found my heart, because what I found was that rather than having businesses or my career establishing my sense of validation, instead it was my freedom that was really where my validation came from. And it's too bad this picture over here on this side. Let's see if I can move. I don't know if I can move people without. Oh, I'm going to click through it. Anyway, what you can't see is there's a hammock hanging just behind that little photo there, or this bar toolbar, and that was a hammock that I lived in for a month. So after I had one kid who was still in Costa Rica, she was working with basically a house that she was managing a house for social media influencers. And at the time she was a drone pilot and a videographer and a photographer. And then my other two kiddos had gone back to the United States. Well, I figured I don't need to be paying for a place to stay. So I just lived on a beach then in Costa Rica for a month. And at the time I was the only American living on the beach and the only woman living on the beach. So I would always wear these dresses. I'd wear Patagonia dresses so that nobody would mess with me. They'd take me seriously because I'm wearing a dress. And so even when I was sleeping in the hammock at night, I'd be wearing my dress. And nobody did. I mean, it was really interesting. It was a fascinating cultural experience. I could tell you that, living in a hammock for a month. But that would have been, oh, actually that was last year. That was actually just last May, April, actually the month of April last year. So that was a kind of a cool experience. Well, then we ended up traveling, the girls and I ended up going to Peru. Now, our family had been going to Peru on and off. And as I mentioned, we'd lived in Peru for a while. We'd done some high altitude climbing. My son couldn't go with us because his passport needed to be renewed and we couldn't get it back in time. So that's tragic. That's actually part of the reason I'm including my kids in this documentary coming up in September. I want all three of them to go with me on one of these high altitude climbs. So this one was the Lares Trek. It was 17,000 feet. When we did it, my girls were 16 and 18. And they were troopers. They did such a good job, especially up, when it got really cold. But what I realized is that travel for the sake of travel is really just another form of escape. So I started to really and encourage the kids to tune into nature and use nature as to heal. And this wasn't a new concept for our family. I had a kiddo who struggled with depression, and she did a 10-day kind of a soul quest backpacking trip in the Olympic National Park, and ended up really truly actually becoming, healing the depression. And she said that nature was what healed her. So I would say that all of my kids, to one degree or another, have found nature to be profoundly healing. And interestingly, for me personally, Peru is the place on the planet that I can feel that connection to nature most strongly. And I think part of it is because of the belief system of the indigenous people who live there. The Pachamama is central to everything. And my middle daughter went to Bali and spent lots of times in Bali, and she said it's very similar. That like when you go to plant a seed, the seed is blessed before it goes into the ground. Every time it's watered, there's a little prayer that's said over it. You think of the food, what type of energy goes into a food source where they're constantly, there's gratitude, there's intentionality, there's this thankfulness for the food, and they recognize from the time it's a seed the synergistic relationship between the food and our bodies. And you think of that compared to like here we have the ability to eat such a wide assortment of food, and yet from an energetic standpoint, you look at like what I'd rather have rice from that culture rather than filet mignon from ours. When you look at what goes into those plants. And the indigenous people don't take anything for granted, and they can't. I mean, they are living. These houses that are in this picture are luxury homes compared to a lot of the places that we would see along the trek. A lot of people are living in something that's a glorified lean-to. It has 4 walls because it gets cold at night, but they wear these sandals and their feet are exposed. Meanwhile, it's snowing outside. It's literally, we'd be out in blizzards, and you'd see a woman walking and she takes shelter when the blizzard's actually really strong and the winds are strong. She'll have 3 kids, a baby and 2 little kids that are like under waist high, and she's taking shelter behind a rock wall. And here we're dressed in our 3-layer Gore-Tex and puffy jackets and hats and gloves. And so, it's just it's eye-opening how very, how very spoiled we are, but also how strong our bodies are, what the human body can handle. But in any case, I would say that one of the most special places in Peru for me is this mountain Asungate. And as a matter of fact, last October, I returned to Asungate to spend 10 days with some paqos, which are kind of like an Incan priest. It's not the same as a shaman. The shaman would work with, the way they describe it anyways, shaman works with magic, whereas paqos work with the earth's energy. And so they interact with, they believe that it's an animistic culture. So they believe that every mountain, every lake, every river has a spirit. And each of them, they approach each with great reverence and respect. And even in their daily prayers, they mention the mountains that are important to them. And different paqos would have different mountains that I guess that resonate with them more. They consider the mountains to be their teachers. They spend a lot of time in meditation, contemplation, and ceremony. Ceremony is a huge part of their daily practice. Now I've started leading these expeditionary retreats to Peru, and my retreats start with an optional plant-based medicine ceremony, followed by 5 days of integration, hiking through the Andes. And the plant-based medicine that I've chosen to work with is called wachuma, which is similar to peyote. Ayahuasca is also an option, but I just feel like there are different ways people can learn. You can learn by a stern talking to, or you can learn with a baseball bat. I think of ayahuasca as being the baseball bat. Not everybody needs a baseball bat. I think of, and Wachuma is gentler. It's like a stern talking to, and they're both kind of consciousness expanding. It's funny because I remember I used to always be the person who'd say, I can accomplish the same thing without a plant-based medicine ceremony. I don't need to take plant-based medicines. And I've only done 1 plant-based medicine for each, 1 ayahuasca, 1 wachuma. And having done that, I can officially say, I don't know that I could have, even in 10 years of heavy meditation, ever gotten to the place where I could get in a plant-based medicine ceremony in terms of the perspective. It shifts. I think kind of like the mind is like a rubber band. So even if you stretch it, it's going to return to its original shape. Plant-based medicines kind of force the rubber band to stretch farther and it can't quite go back again. So that's how I describe it. And yet I also do believe that plant-based medicines, along with the people in Peru, that they are not for everyone, that in order to take a plant-based medicine, you should feel a calling to it. It should feel like something that is not just idle curiosity. It's something that is, that feels like it's important for your next evolutionary step. And when you do feel that, it does feel like it's the next logical step. It doesn't feel like something strange or unusual. I know for a long time I worried about being judged because a lot of people in our culture might see plant-based medicines as being similar to drugs. And I'm not a drug person, but I can tell you that this is, it's something, it would be kind of like the difference, I would say the difference between plant-based medicines in a ceremonial setting would be similar to taking communion on Sunday morning, that as opposed to, having a glass of wine with friends on Friday night. It's not the same thing. They're two very different things. So anyway, that's kind of my experience with plant-based medicines, and the people there are very respectful too. A lot of Westerners don't understand that, and they come down and kind of just habitually take these plant-based medicines, not understanding that they're really meant to be more of a rite of passage, something that gets you from point A to point B, not something that you just kind of keep doing over and over because it's interesting. But anyway, I mean, and I don't want to, it's not like I'm casting judgment either over the people who do choose to do that. It's just, it's not part of their culture. It's not part of the Andean culture. So anyway, but the other thing is that a lot of Americans, what they would do, or Westerners, will go do a plant-based medicine ceremony and then head off on the plane the next day. Meanwhile, their minds are blown, but they don't really know what to do with it. And your psyche has to almost like reform. And so it's going to, like, kind of like that rubber band analogy, it's going to go back to where it was if it doesn't have a chance, if you don't provide the opportunity for integration. So that's why I take people into nature to give them 5 days of integration hiking in the Andes, so that nature can continue to do the work that it needs to do on the heart, on the spirit, because it will, and amazing things happen. My first ceremony, I wasn't even going for any kind of physical healing, and literally every single physical ailment I had disappeared. I had a shoulder that I was going to be getting some injections because I had hyperextended it 6 months earlier, and it just wasn't healing. And literally after this Wachuma ceremony, the next morning, I couldn't remember which shoulder it was that had been hurting. All kinds of little things, back pains, knee pains, everything just sort of disappeared. I have no idea why. That doesn't happen to everybody, but that happened to me, and I was not expecting it. Even I had a tick bite from the Amazon jungle, something, I don't know if it was a tick or a spider, but it was something that had actually caused necrosis. So I had this black area that I knew was going to need medical attention when I got back to the States. But after the plant-based medicine ceremony, it just disappeared. Like within 3 days, it was completely gone. So just bizarre things like that. Like I said, I didn't go into the intention, but that's just sort of, I find that that's how nature works. It's like it's like a reset button. It reminds you of your natural state of health, because our natural state is to be healthy. Our cells in their natural state are healthy. And as long as we provide the space for that to happen, which in nature you have this reconnection where I almost feel like it is. It's like hitting the reset button, or maybe even a system upgrade. I'm not sure which way it works, but that's the idea. It's just kind of like it restores something that you didn't realize you'd lost. So anyway, some of these pictures, upper left, that's my daughter sitting there with a horse. And then those are some of our camping shots there on Asungate. My kids got really excited about the food every day. I'm old enough that I don't carry my own pack anymore on these extended trips. I try to save my joints. So we have horses that carry our packs for us. and a chef that cooked all of our meals for us. All those things are so much less expensive there than they would be here. So we took advantage of the luxury of having that. But in any case, I do mention that Peru, when people say, well, why Peru? It's because that is the place that I guess I feel the closest to nature. And because of the food, because of the mountains, because of the Pachamama, and because of the belief system of people that live there, I think it does provide a unique opportunity to experience healing, physical, mental, spiritual. This is kind of long. Expeditionary retreat. That's actually a term that I kind of made up, but and this is sort of my statement of belief. It's that we as humans share intrinsic needs and values. We long for a sense of a place, purpose, and a sense of belonging. We long for authenticity, permission to be the truest version of ourselves. We long to be seen, to be accepted, to be loved. But in modern society, often those needs go unmet. We find ourselves in unfulfilling careers. We seek validation through social media or other sources. We fall prey to cycles of addiction. We experience disappointment, heartbreak when others fail to meet our unmet needs. And an expeditionary retreat reorients our perspectives, refines our narratives, and provides a sense of place. Nature helps to identify our hidden wounds, shining light into the dark places where the misalignments are hiding. And the nature will also settle for nothing less than our authentic selves, because it teaches us to stand unyielding and steadfast in our truth. We are given the opportunity to see and be seen in a community of belonging, acceptance, and shared experience. We are reminded of the unequivocal, unconditional love of nature that is our intrinsic birthright. So soul mending is a process of seeking living spirit to restore our relationship with nature. So that's kind of I guess that was also something of a mission statement that I'm using going forward for the documentary in Peru. The soul mending is it's something that as a matter of fact, the documentary is something I want to submit to the Banff Film Festival, because it talks about how I want to incorporate the paqos into it, those Andean priests, because they are such pure human beings. I had such a fun time with them. I speak Spanish not super well. They speak English not super well. And in the 10 days, we were just, there's no better way to put it other than playing. I mean, laughing, chasing. We played soccer. Even at one point, there was one of the paqos was kind of messing with me. He took my flute and he wouldn't give it back. And he kept kind of like, pretending like, nope, not going to give it back. Nope, not going to give it back. And so then I started tickling him. And I kid you not, everybody in our group, because it would be like tickling a priest. That's what it really like. I mean, everybody just froze, including the other paqos too. Everybody looked at me like, what are you doing? And I found myself thinking, what did I just do? And I looked at him and he looked at me, and all of a sudden he started laughing and laughing and laughing. And then everybody started laughing. And it was like one of those moments that you could never recreate. It was just so beautiful. But it was like in that moment where I thought, as much as there's that sacredness and that reverence and that respect, they're also people. They're human, and they, for lack of a better way to put it, take delight, joy in life. And so it's a profoundly beautiful culture. So anyway, some people have asked before about traveling alone in Peru. And I would say most of the time, it's not an issue at all. Right now, because of the civil unrest in Peru, it's really important to make sure you know what's going on in the communities where you're traveling. And part of the reason that with my documentary that I'm actually using my own family as the subjects in the documentary is because I am not really confident taking other people to Peru. I have no problem with my own kids. Our families traveled a lot during civil unrest, as long as there is not civil unrest in the region that we're traveling. So in other words, so we were in Nicaragua and there were demonstrations in Managua, but we were going to be in San Juan del Sur. Well, that's kind of like, I mean, I know it's a smaller country, but it'd be kind of like saying, well, I'm not going to go to the United States because there was a riot at the Capitol, but meanwhile, I'm not going to go to California. It's a different, I mean, it's kind of like that, not quite, but it's similar to that too in some of those other countries, including Peru. But as long as you're aware of kind of like where demonstrations are happening, I would say it's still fine to travel independently. But it is something to monitor. State Department, I get daily State Department updates, and it's very specific. And the other thing I tell my kids too, the one rule they're supposed to adhere to is that if the State Department pulls their staff, then we hit the road. So, because that's the other criteria I use, is if the State Department pulls their personnel, then we leave too. So anyway, I don't know if I covered everything having to do with Peru or not. I'll go back. I'll turn the screen back over. Oh no, now I'm not going to be able to find. There it is. Yay. So does anybody have any questions or?
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering what you mean. I missed the part. Maybe what you said was the Pachamama. Can you give a little bit more definition?
Yes. The Pachamama would be an earth mother. And so this again is an animistic culture. They believe that everything, including the mountains, they each have their own unique spirit. Each mountain, each lake, each stream. The Pachamama is like the overarching deity that they see the Pachamama as benevolent, as the Pachamama is responsible for all of life. It's both creative and also like fertility, ongoing in terms of the relationship with Pachamama. Just as an example, I was up in the mountains one time. This was on the Asungate Trek, and I was talking to some local indigenous folks. They speak Quechua, so they were trying to speak Spanish. I was trying to understand Spanish, so there was a little bit of a communication, a little bit of a lag.
Quechua don't usually know Spanish.
What was that?
Quechua those people don't usually know Spanish.
Yeah, and the older one, like the older gentleman there, didn't. The younger two did, and they were doing the best they could. But anyway, so we were talking about, because I was trying to understand the belief around the local apus, the spirit, and I was trying to find out kind of like how far does it reach in terms of that realm of the apus? Is it just the point? Is it, so that's what we were talking about. Anyway, at some point I said the word Pachamama, and the older man, the Quechua man, absolutely melted. Like his face changed, everything about his demeanor completely changed. The look of tenderness in his eyes, like it was like you were talking about his own mother, and he was just and he was so moved just by the name, by the word Pachamama. And the other two too, the guys who were translating, they were like, you don't know what that means to us. Like the Pachamama for us is something so beautiful, so sacred, so precious, like, and you could see it in their faces. So yeah, that's the Pachamama.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Christy, we have a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see them.
Oh,
but so Kim is wondering, how is, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Machui? Oh,
Machu Picchu, maybe? Yeah. I'm guessing it's Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu, when she says overrun 10 years ago, as far as like lots of people at Machu Picchu. That's true. Tons of people at Machu Picchu. Not since COVID. Since COVID, we've seen so few people at Machu Picchu. As a matter of fact, when we first, so I've been to Peru now at least twice. I'm trying to think of this 3 times. I think maybe it's twice since COVID. It's just I was there a long time the first time. And no, 3 times. It was 3 times. Okay. Yeah, no, 3 times. The first time, almost nobody at Machu Picchu. Second time, a little more of the tourism coming back. Now with the revolt, or with so there's civil unrest because the president was just ousted, and then the new president, there were some issues. And so now again, Machu Picchu's empty. As a matter of fact, they closed it. They actually closed Machu Picchu for a while, but it's reopened again.
It also became a UNESCO site, and they were limiting, I think, the number of people. Like when I was there, it was a number of years ago, but they were limiting. You had to have tickets. And
yes. And you can only stay for a certain amount of time, like
right.
a time limit. And now they actually make it so that it's almost like I have not been back since this happened, but it was a where you actually have to follow a route through it's not a free-for-all. Like you used to be able to just kind of scramble and run through the different ruins, but now you actually have to follow a route. And Huayna Picchu, although even when I went 20 years ago, Huayna Picchu was timed. So every 15 minutes. Huayna Picchu is like, if you look at a picture of Machu Picchu, and in case people don't know, Machu Picchu is an Incan citadel. It's the most famous landmark in Peru. And you can't get to it by car. You have to take a train. And the train is actually ridiculously expensive. Sometimes like the most expensive part of the trip is the stupid train to Machu Picchu. And then there's also transportation getting up there. So Machu Picchu is actually pretty expensive. The rest of the deal, that's the crazy thing. So here, Machu Picchu, to go to Machu Picchu is probably $200, maybe just under $200 for everything, for the train, for the entrance, for the tour guide, for the bus that goes up and down from Machu Picchu. But to get a tourist pass that allows you access to every other Incan site in Peru is $40. And you can get to Sacsayhuaman, which is in Cusco. Pisac, the ruins at Pisac are incredible. Ollantaytambo, the ruins are incredible. There are the Maras salt flats, Moray salt flats. There are all these areas that are like incredible cultural heritage sites, and they're all $40 total. But Machu Picchu is super expensive.
Well, there's another question, Christy. It's about the cost of living for Westerners
in Peru, I assume. Yeah, actually, so it depends how you want to live. There are places, I'm going to use the Sacred Valley because that's what I know. Now, the Sacred Valley is probably going to be a little more expensive than, like, say, Arequipa is a great place to live. I love Arequipa. It's in the mountains. And you have access to El Misti, which is I think it's 15,000. I can't remember if it's 15,000, maybe even 16. It's high. And a lot of those Incan mummies. So a lot of the Incan mummies were found, not a lot, some of the Incan mummies were found outside of El Misti, or in that same range over there. But in the Sacred Valley, if you want to live like a Westerner, so in other words, if you want to live in a place that looks like a Western home, you can find places. They'll probably be $700 a night in Pisac, for example. Not a night. Sorry, a month. $700 a month. However, and this is now, I'm using this is now, not necessarily, like, it was more expensive before COVID. Peru got hit worse than any other country in the world in terms of the death rate. They had the highest death rate in the world from COVID. that combined with the civil unrest, it's driven a lot of the real estate prices down. So now you're looking, like I said, around $750. But it costs nothing to eat. It's like really good food. Peru is ranked one of the for 2 years out of the last 10 years, best cuisine in the world by, I can't remember, the Travel and Leisure. It was like some major magazine. So Peru has incredible food. Part of the reason for that is because they have incredible diversity. So whereas you go to our grocery stores and let's say you go to a really great grocery store, you might find 8 different types of potatoes, maybe 10, right? They have 600 varieties of potatoes in Peru. Corn, all different types of corn. Your tomatoes, just like we have the heritage type tomatoes, they have they're so proud of all their different types of tomatoes. Now, that's not to say that they don't also have more commercial agriculture. They do, but you can see it. You can actually kind of, you can find, you can detect it. It's all the stuff that's really big. They used a lot of, it's not commercial either. I shouldn't use that. The one where they use a lot of pesticides, they do still use pesticides. They do use fertilizers, but it's not as common. And there are a lot of farms that are very proud about the fact that they don't use that. So let's see. And I would say if you're willing to live, as I say, live Peruvian, which you're still going to have indoor plumbing. It's just that maybe your water might be hot. It might not be. It's like one of those type of things. And the beds kind of look maybe a little more Peruvian or something like that, or maybe it's not, like in our houses, you walk down the hall, you have everything in one enclosed area. There are places in Peru where you walk out onto a balcony to go into each of the individual bedrooms, or that's how you enter a bathroom. So it's just a little bit different in terms of layout. I had a place I was living for $350 a month, and it had 3 bedrooms. So my kids and I could live in that place, and it was perfectly comfortable. We had 2 bathrooms, but you just walk on a little balcony to get to the bedrooms, and you walk in the balcony to get to the living room kind of kitchen area. But I loved it. It was great. It was actually amazing. When we were living there, though, with my husband, we had, for the 6 months, we had a beautiful luxury home. And I mean, like really luxury home. And that was $3,000 a month. So it was but it was normally a lodge. Like it would normally be rented out by the room. So he just rented the whole lodge, basically.
So Christy, Lucy is wondering about the price of traveling to Peru. She says she's from Ecuador and is indigenous. And yeah, so she's wondering about the price of traveling to Peru. Her sister is trying to go to Peru.
Well, if she's from Ecuador, she's in much better shape than us, because it's cheap to fly between the countries in Latin America. It is expensive. And it's not just expensive, it's ridiculous in terms of just the logistics are really tough. They've gotten hard. I don't know if it's because the airlines have changed their schedules. My trip in October was the most I've ever spent on a flight, at least twice as much as I've ever spent on a flight. And I had to break it up with different airlines, which meant that when one of my airlines ended up changing their itinerary, I lost my other return flights and had to rebook them on the spot. It ended up being probably, I don't even want to think about going back and looking at it to be factual, but it had to have been close to $3,000 that I ended up spending in airfare on that trip. I'd say now the trick is that you can find, those budget airlines like Sun Country or Frontier or those type of airlines, they have flights that go from Miami to Lima. So you can find a 350, 370, something like that flight from Miami to Lima. The problem is you have to get from here to Miami, then you have to get from Lima to Cusco. And so now you're booking on multiple airlines. And then that can really screw you up, because if something gets canceled, your other flights are just lost. So I would say right now, what you'd need to probably budget is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 for a flight. And it used to be $800 easily. I could always find flights for $800 round trip. Now it's like I said, 12 to 15.
So, Christy, I have a question. I was wondering, when you took that camping trip and you had the cook and you had the horse carrying your pack, what kind of cost would someone be looking at for, say, like a 5-day or a 7-day trip like that?
That one's a little trickier. I ended up going through a friend who, and so that's kind of like part of what I do is work with somebody who's able to line up the horses, because I don't know the horseman and I don't know the chef, and he's the person who knew the horseman, the chef. But I would say for that portion of the trip, probably you could probably budget $100 a day and know that you're going to be fine. That's how I do it. And because remember, it includes your tent. The only thing I would also add to it, the two things it does not include would be the sleeping bag. And they do include a sleeping bag, but your temperatures are often going to be around 20 degrees at night. And it's always below freezing, because think of it this way, all the rivers always have that, the ice in the morning. So, it's always below freezing. And there's a good chance that it gets around 20 is what I would probably guess. I didn't actually check, but that I'm sure it was around that. It could have been a little colder. So I like to have a sleeping bag that I buy or that I rent down there, and it's a per day charge. And if I remember correctly, it was $20 a day for the rental of the sleeping bag, because I wanted one that was a 0 degree bag. And then the other thing is hiking poles. That's the only other thing that's not included. I just bring my own collapsible. And really, I would recommend hiking poles. So important. Do not forget hiking poles. And if you do, rent them. It will save your joints.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, how do you get a hold of your book or is it out yet? Your book? Or?
Yeah. It's on Amazon.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Yep. Escape Bound is on Amazon. And then I'm actually working on another book right now called How to Rock When You're Already on a Roll. It's 21 soul mending practices to look younger, live larger, and love more deeply. So that's another one that's in the works, but Escape Bound is on Amazon.
The other thing I was wondering was, you were talking about the medicines, the food-based or plant-based medicines.
Plant-based, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious what that was, or I don't know.
Yeah. So Huachuma, which is down there, it's called San Pedro. And that would be a like peyote. And ayahuasca is not like anything else. It's just so the Huachuma is from a cactus, and ayahuasca is from a vine. It's a vine and something else in the Amazon jungle. It's a combination of two things, and they are hallucinogenics. So they both kind of provide that psychedelic type experience.
Yeah, I was married too. I'm widowed, but my wife used to work with the Indians, and I really enjoyed listening to that. Yeah, because even the American Indians have kind of similar concepts, and they worship the earth, and they have a lot of respect for that, and they have it's a totally different way of living than we do. It's like,
yes,
it's
interesting because my sister went down to Peru with me. It's actually a sister-in-law. She had worked with the Ojibwe tribe up in Duluth, and is actually a part of the tribe, has her own spirit name. And she said, like, she just was blown away at the similarities. She said, here are two cultures that who knows how long they would have been separate. And yet she said everything, so much from the movement. She said it's eerie to watch them do their ceremonies, because the ceremonies are so similar to the ceremonies she's seen with the Ojibwe tribe.
So interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
So how do they take care of you if you have a bad trip?
The shaman.
I mean, because the psychedelics can cause psychosis and
Yes. Yes.
hallucinations and make people kind of
Super important. So that would be, I would say that would be the number one reason why you would want to go with for lack of a better way to put it, an indigenous shaman who's a real shaman. I mean, they actually have been trained in this. They've been there are so many, and in Peru in particular, they're notorious for the false shamans. They're people who their relative was a shaman at one point in time, so they're like, yeah, I'm a shaman and I can, so that there's money to be made. These are people who are hungry, and they will, and I'm not going to say that there would never be such a thing as a bad trip with a real shaman, but I've seen what happens, and there things do absolutely go sideways. But to watch what the shaman does, he has such like in a real shaman who is trained, he has such complete control over the entire situation that the moment he turns his attention to the issue, it's like done. And I can give an example that I experienced personally. I'm going to turn on a light just because it's kind of dark here. This isn't a bad thing, but I mean, it was that I had this fit of the giggles. I was laughing and I couldn't stop laughing. And whereas normally that's okay, there's no problem. That's just a response to something. But it happened to be that he was trying to accomplish something else. He was in the middle of something when I was giggling. And so one of his assistants had already kind of told me to pipe down, but I couldn't stop. I was just laughing. And the shaman turned and looked at me and he said, he grunted. I kid you not. That's what it sounded like. It was like a like that. One sound. I dropped. I literally fell asleep. He put me to sleep for I don't know how long, but maybe a half an hour. It wasn't a small reaction. It was like boom, just like I passed out. And he just made a sound. It was just by a like that, and kind of like a sound of disapproval. And then I woke up later and I was like, wow, what happened? My daughter had been there and she said, Mom, it was like you were like asleep for half an hour. You were just out. He made this sound and all of a sudden you're out. And that's kind of how he addresses it. So
how do you discern between a real shaman and a knockoff?
I wouldn't know. I really don't know. I just know the people that I've worked with, and I found them because I had friends down there, and because we've lived down there, I had friends who knew they'd lived there for over 20 years. They knew the people who had been working with the medicine for 20 years. But if you were just coming in, I don't know how you would know, honestly. Yeah. There really wouldn't be a way to know, because there can be people who do a great job with marketing and they have the great shiny brochures. Yeah, I don't know how you'd know.
We have one last question in the chat, and it's about driving. Driving in South America. What's it like?
Depends where. I did a lot of driving in the only two countries I've had experience actually like driving in would be Peru and Costa Rica. So I rented a car in Costa Rica too for most of the time I was there. And in Costa Rica, everything's totally fine, except I would say during the rainy season, torrential downpours, terrifying. I mean, it completely washes out the roads. I ended up with rivers, like literally. So 4-wheel drive is really important, high clearance. Depends if you're just going point A to point B between the cities, then, if you're taking the same route as the buses, no problem. Pretty much anything else in Costa Rica, you should have 4-wheel drive because Once you get into those really rutted areas, all you need is one rainstorm and you're trapped without a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And then as far as Peru, potholes and one of my favorite words in Spanish is rompemuelo, and that's a rompemuelo is a speed bump. So the speed bumps, they're not marked, and you'll come flying down the highway. You hit one of those things, and everybody, I mean, it's just like, oh, they're so bone jarring. So between potholes and speed bumps, and that's in the Sacred Valley, which is fairly heavily traveled. The other thing is I've gotten lost, like just miserably lost in the mountains. Some of those trails, that's what they turn into. They turn into trails. It looks like a road. All of a sudden you're kind of in a pasture. Now you're with cows. Now you're like, wait a minute. Shouldn't I have had to pass a fence to get to cows? So, we ended up with my sister and brother, we ended up so lost. And we were asking this lady, I remember we asked this lady, I said, is this the way to, and I can't remember what city I was looking for. She says, no, mommy. Just like that, too. We laughed. And so for the rest of the trip, we were like, no, mommy.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.